Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is paint. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear paint used is to mean to cover a surface with a colored liquid substance. Many people, when they purchase a new house, will decide to paint the walls. They might not like the previous colors, or maybe the previous paint is starting to chip or look bad. But essentially, what they're doing is covering the walls, that's the surface, with a colored liquid substance. And that substance will eventually dry and harden. A second way you might hear paint used is to mean to produce a picture using colored liquid substances. There are many different substances people can use. Things like watercolors or oil-based paints would be a couple examples. A third way you might hear the verb paint used is to mean to apply makeup to one's face or their skin. This meaning isn't quite as common as the first two, but you may encounter it as you're reading. A fourth way to use the verb paint is to refer to creating graphics using a computer program. Again, this might not be something you hear every day, but if you get into that field or working a lot with computers, then you might run into this verb a little more commonly. You should know that paint is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, all you need to do is add ing to form painting. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. Our base verb, paint, ends with a T sound. So our past tense ending is going to make an id sound. And we're going to add an extra syllable to this word. It should sound like this: painted, painted. Now let's take a look at a couple phrasal verbs. One that you might hear is to paint something as. This particular phrasal verb is always going to be separated. So we're going to have an object come between the verb and the preposition. And this just simply means to describe something very vividly. Imagine you're describing it so clearly that the other person kind of creates a picture in their mind. An example of this could be: the advertisement paints the club as an exclusive place where the most important people gather. So some particular type of advertisement has used certain words or ideas to create this picture in our mind of what this place is like. A second phrasal verb you might hear is to paint over. This simply means that some surface is being covered with paint. An example of this might be: they painted over the ugly wallpaper. Now, I am not an expert when it comes to painting, but I'm pretty sure this is a horrible idea, especially if you look to remove the paint or the wallpaper in the future. Now, let's spend some time practicing our verb of the day, paint, in the imperative and the past progressive. We'll start with the imperative. You might know this as a command. It's rather special in English because we don't start our sentence with a subject. We don't start with I, you, we, he, she, etc., okay, or a name. We are going to just begin our affirmative sentences with the base verb. And we're doing that because the subject is implied. It's either you, the person to whom you're speaking, or you, the person to whom you're writing. And that you could be singular or plural. So you could be referring to many yous. Okay? An example of something you might hear as an imperative: paint a picture of your favorite place. Maybe this is something an art teacher says to her students, giving them this command. This is your assignment during class. Now, if you want to make a negative imperative, so you're telling someone not to do a particular action, you can begin your sentence with do not and then the base verb, or do or don't and the base verb. We can imagine that same art teacher who gives this assignment to her students. Paint your favorite place, but don't paint your desk, clothes, or other classmates, right? So just paint on the paper is what is being said here. Now, I'll point out with both the affirmative and the negative, we can always soften our sentences or make them a bit more polite by adding the word please at the beginning or please at the end. It's not required, and if these were sentences that a teacher was saying to his or her students, it's kind of unlikely they might say please because they really want the students to know this is something they want to do. They don't have an option of doing something else. You'll notice also there are no yes or no questions in the imperative. These are only affirmative or negative sentences. Next, let's take a look at the past progressive. We use this verb tense to talk about some ongoing activity at some point in the past. And we need two parts to make the past progressive. We need a past form of be, so that's going to be was or were, depending on what our subject is. So if the subjects are I, he, she, or it, we'll use was. And if our subjects are you, we, or they, we'll use were. And then we'll use that ing form of the verb. An example sentence could be Neanderthals were painting caves in Europe before modern humans inhabited the continent. Inhabited here just means lived in or lived on the continent. Now, if you want to make a negative past progressive sentence, just insert not between the be verb and the ing form. An example of this. She wasn't painting while a high school student, so this was not an ongoing activity. If you want to make a yes or no question, you can start with the past form of be, whichever form matches your subject, and the subject comes next, and then we'll have the ing form of the verb. Here's another example. Were local artists painting a mural in downtown all last week? So we're asking if this action was ongoing. Now let's spend just a little time looking at some words and phrases that are related to our verb paint. The first word we're going to start with is just the noun form of this word. So we have the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. One of the meanings for the noun paint is a colored substance which is spread over a surface and it dries to leave a thin coat or thin coating. An example of this could be, let's go to the hardware store for some more paint. Perhaps we didn't buy enough and we have more walls to cover. A second way you might hear paint used is in the sport of basketball. It could refer to a rectangular area that's near each basket, so it's on both sides of the court. And I have a little picture here to help us understand what it looks like, right? So if you look down here, where I have my cursor kind of going back and forth, the red and yellow areas, that would be referred to as the paint. An example of how you might hear this, again connected to basketball, is the team scored 36 points in the paint. The next word we'll look at is also another noun. It's painter. This could be referring to an artist who paints pictures. An example of this might be Frida Kahlo was a famous Mexican painter. Right? So an artist who was internationally known for her pictures and particularly her self-portraits. So the pictures she painted of herself. But a second way you might hear painter used is to refer to a person who does more commercial painting. So they might paint buildings, homes, etc., and they're doing it for work. An example of this particular meaning in a sentence might be, we should hire a painter to repaint the whole house, right? So many people are capable of painting, but professional painters tend to do a much nicer job than the average person. They take their time to use tape and make sure the paint isn't getting into other areas where it shouldn't be. And yeah, they just tend to do a much nicer job. The last thing I'm going to leave you with today is the phrase like watching paint dry. This might not be something you hear every day, but I think it's kind of a fun phrase, and it's a way to say that something is extremely boring. So, we've talked about the idea of paint, the noun, being a liquid, right? And you can imagine applying it to a surface. Then imagine if you sat there and watched the paint dry, watched it harden into that thin coating, right? That would take a long time and it would be extremely boring, right? You're not visually seeing that much happen. So, how you might hear it used in a sentence could be something like, "This book is like watching paint dry." So, again, you're just saying that reading this is extremely boring. Well, I hope watching this video hasn't been like watching paint drying, and I appreciate you for watching. Have a great day.